Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another live stream, the Crazy Shift Show, as they've been calling it. Be careful when we say that. And I want to welcome to this afternoon session Lee Andrese and Lance Hahn. We'll get to them in a minute. I want to thank everybody who was joining me again. We had a great conversation with Chuck Coker earlier this morning about trust and leadership. So hopefully you heard that. If not, it's up on replay. It's on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. If you need the links, just contact me. But if you go to probably the easiest place is youtube.com/Ira Wolfe. And right at the top, it's on the playlist, and it will be there. If you're not a member yet, I hope you subscribe to Googleization Nation. At this point, basically, I'm sending out the updates when I'm doing the live streams. This is my fourth one this week, plus the podcast. We've got a couple lined up next week. Let me just do that real quickly while I'm here. Where's Dorothy Dalton? I don't remember the time, but we'll be talking to Dorothy on Monday about disrupting leadership. Dorothy's from Belgium. And she's got some great ideas, and it really is about disrupting leadership. So we'll be talking about that today for sure. And then we're going to be talking with Elena Valentine. And I don't know, Lance and Lee, if you saw that yesterday, the Humans at Work project that they have. It is absolutely unbelievable. You talk about true heroes in the workforce, people at work, and it was about an hour presentation, an hour movie. It's a story of, I think there were 4 people that were in it, and they're going to continue to do these videos in there. And Skill Scout, that's what their business is. It's videos for businesses, but powerful stories. It was great. They had a couple hundred people on the call, and so that was. So again, Alina will be on, and hopefully we'll be able to show you a clip or two from that project that she had. But we're here today, and I can't wait to talk about this because there's quite a few things going on, if you haven't noticed, both in the workplace and in our environment. I want to throw up a quote because I think this is the context I'd like to have this with. So Warren Buffett, quote, "Only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked." And it seems that there's a lot of people swimming naked. There's a lot of people standing on the beach without jobs, and that's not the fun. I mean, that's not funny. I mean, but there's a lot of people. But there's a lot of companies. There's a lot of institutions. There's a lot of industries that have just seemed to have gotten away with a lot for a long time. People thought that, we understand technology is going to catch up and we're going to be on this exponential curve moving forward. And eventually this will happen to us, but not right now. And then the pandemic crisis hit, and it exposed the vulnerabilities in the healthcare industry. I mean, everything we knew that was a problem, overnight it did that. I was just listening as we were talking before to Bob Johansson on the Global Network. And they were talking about the food chain and the food supply chain, how vulnerable it was, and what a problem it was. I love this quote, and then I'm going to turn it over to you guys. I'll have you introduce yourself. But they talked about, this was interesting. They talked about, and we're hearing this a lot, about the heroes of this pandemic crisis are certainly not our government officials and many industry leaders, but it's the front line, it's the healthcare workers, and it's the grocery store workers. Mm-hmm. And this was a profound quote. They said, by saying that they're heroes, it justifies how they've been exploited. And it's like, how do we have the heroes that are getting $10, $12 an hour? They're living on the verge of poverty. We don't even provide them with equipment, and they are heroes in that sense of they're running into a burning building, without equipment. But under normal circumstances, that's insane. I mean, people would be fired from their jobs. Now they're being rewarded as heroes. And in a sense is we don't want to call them heroes because that's exploiting their position. That's the setup for where we are. A lot of things we're going to talk about. And especially since we're on this verge of going back to work, reopening America, reopening for businesses. And so I'm just going to go in order on the screen. Lee, I'd like you to introduce yourself, your company, and I guess the one question I had, and I got a lot of questions here, but what surprised you the most by the crisis? What's like that one big, what was the thing that just shocked the crap out of you? And it's like, wow, I even you and Lance being sort of on top of some of these things, it said, I had never thought about that. Yeah. So Lee.
So I think that, first of all, I'm Lee and I'm with akathame. And akathame is an organization that works with human resources departments and organizations to make sure that culture is part of their recruiting and hiring process. So we make sure that that's blended in there. So what shocked me? I think what shocked me is that so many people were shocked about what happened.
That's fair.
Honest to goodness. And I might be a little tainted in this area because I grew up, my father was a PhD microbiologist, virologist. Mm-hmm. So when you grow up in a household where you are constantly hearing about different kinds of testing, different types of viruses that he's attacking, and his entire thought process throughout his entire life was about research, testing, research. I mean, it was always about the test. And so I spent many, years in his labs and, experiencing all of that kind of stuff. So what surprises me is that people are so surprised that this is what happens when a pandemic hits. What did you expect? What did you expect to have happen?
No, exactly. And similar to that, I mean, I had 30 years of healthcare background, as a provider, as a VP of a hospital, on the board of a hospital, and you knew all these things were so vulnerable and was sort of patched together, and and especially even with insurance, how things were paid, and there's there's literally it's that here's what we charge, but then there's 1,000 different fee schedules that people pay all these different rates. But if you went in and asked for that, you couldn't do it. And it's like just from that, it was vulnerable. But from staffing and how people were traded, it was incredible.
I think, Ira, it's even worse than that. We have had thousands of years of history to live off of. We know that these things are going to happen.
Every 100 years.
Right.
1720, 1820, 1920, and now 2020.
So why must humans wait until the point of pain causes them to see the opportunities to improve the world around us, right? Whether it's anything from a simple process to, driving from point A to point B, right? How fast can you get there? Well, amazingly, we've got cars that get faster and faster every year. But when you really look at it that way, history tells us this will not be the last pandemic. It wasn't the first pandemic. So why aren't we constantly improving the world we live in?
We're going to answer that in the next 30 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Lance.
Yeah, Lance Hahn. I'm with TLNT.com. I'm the editor there. So we focus on HR and workforce issues. Just started my job just as the pandemic was taking off. So that was an exciting time, right? To start a job publishing information for HR leaders. But I mean, my background, similar to you guys, I was an HR leader for a decade and before this, and understand some of the challenges there. I think what I was most surprised by was just how many organizations, Lee, to your point, not prepared for a pandemic, but not prepared for any business disruption at all. I mean, it's kind of amazing that we went through 9/11 and all these other things where you can see that this could be a serious disruption to their business, and they weren't prepared for anything. There was no business continuity plans along those lines, and so that was, to me, that's really shocking. I mean, it seems to be business 101. Like, what happens if we can't come into work anymore? What should we do if disaster strikes, even if it's an earthquake or anything along those lines? We're out here on the West Coast, and things like earthquakes and natural disasters, people that are hurricane, areas, that sort of thing. They were kind of prepared for those types of, like, maybe short-term closures, but not for anything like this, where nobody's going to be allowed to come in for a long period of time. It seems like, healthcare organizations were best prepared for this because they are expected to stay open. A lot of the public service agencies are expected to be open. I think what you see with grocers and sort of those second responders, trucking companies, those sorts of things that keep everything else moving during this time, those are the ones having difficulties with this, because they would shut down during an earthquake, they would shut down during a hurricane, and open back up as quickly as possible. Well, they're expected to work through this, and so that was probably the most shocking thing, is just how unprepared I think a lot of organizations were.
Yeah, well, and I guess it shouldn't be a big surprise, because every year they announce it's no surprise the baby boomers are getting older. It's no surprise that the baby boomers who were supposed to retire at 55 then stay to work till 65, and now they're 75, some are even 85. That are still, I don't remember the statistics, but it's like 75% of companies have no succession plan. And the succession plan they have, by the time they get around doing it, they go, yeah, we have a succession plan. The person that they were looking to replace them is now not too old, but they may be in their 50s or 60s.
That's right.
Because it was supposed to happen 20 years ago. So, I mean, even little things like that. But what the one thing that I don't know if it, again, I love what you said, Lee. It's like the biggest surprise was that, or the biggest shock was that people weren't shocked. IBM is one of the leading companies that's out there of understanding the workforce, especially with IBM Watson, at least using data to be able to do that. And it's all running together. I know you're all probably familiar with Jason Averbook. He calls these days Blur's Day. Every day's a blur. But the CHRO from IBM was being interviewed. And I think it was at the Global Network, by the way, and the Global Mental Network. And what she said was that what surprised her, or not surprised her, what caught them by surprise, was that they did not know who their essential workers were.
Yeah.
So when it said, hey, non-essential workers have to stay home, essential workers, that even an organization with all the data at the forefront of where we're going says, we never even thought to consider who essential workers were. And then even what an essential worker was, because there are some essential workers that don't meet the labor qualification of that, but they are essential to make the company run. So it's interesting. So they don't meet a legal classifications, but you can't run the company without them. And then how do we do that? And then we send them home, and then we don't have the technology. So there's a lot that's happened. Let's go forward. Let's go to the present and then go forward. And I know this is a big question, provocative question for all of us. So the doors are starting to open. There's 31 states that now have some reopening plans. Some have already done that to some degree. Georgia, Texas, I think Texas went today. And there's this gradual thing. It's like, okay, restaurants can be 25% open. You go to beaches, you got to keep your space safe. But we also know what's happening in the meatpacking plants. You can have all these shields. You go out for smoke and you have a plastic shield and they disinfect everything. Then you go back in, and I don't know if you heard this on the news last night, but in order, it's so noisy for a supervisor, for someone to communicate to a supervisor, they have to whisper in their ear. Not whisper, but they have to shout in their ear. Because that's the only way they could communicate because of the noise. So while we're reopening, what are you seeing? What are some of the biggest challenges out there as companies try to bring back their employees? So, Lance, I'm going to throw this to you because I know that you would send this is one of your talking points, and I know Lee, you've got definite opinions on this as well.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, for a lot of organizations, the mandatory shutdowns actually made it much easier for them. I mean, it made the decision. It didn't take leadership to shut down because the government just said you can't work anymore, or you have to work with these sorts of restrictions in mind. Now, to your point, Ira, you see companies in Georgia starting to open up. The state's supposedly open for business, but you see some restaurants there. And I actually read this today in the news that some restaurants there aren't reopening. In spite of the fact that it's okay for them to do so. So I think you're going to see companies really some companies at least take a thoughtful approach to this to say, even if our government says that it's okay for us to open up, we're going to be worried about both the risk to our clients and to our employees as well. And I know the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and some politicians have pushed to make that liability, like limit the liability of organizations for people, for clients and employees that get sick at work because they're open. They've worked to try to do that. I don't think a lot of organizations are taking that bait, though. I think they're trying to protect their employees, and even at the legal level, I think that's an important step to be taking. One thing that we saw on TLNT, and the post is actually up today, is a great post, a really comprehensive one about from some employment lawyers about returning to work and some considerations, both from a legal perspective, because I think that's important, but also just from a leadership perspective, the sort of considerations you should be taking. So things like how much public contact are people going to have, so if you think about the difference between a retail opening and like a law office or consulting shop opening, how much space can you give people there? What do you do when somebody has a sick relative at home? Or they're more susceptible to it, or they've got somebody who's sensitive to that as well. What do you do when somebody has childcare or daycare issues? Because those aren't all opening up at once, and certainly schools aren't going to be opening up here in Washington State for the rest of the year. So people are going to be dealing with childcare challenges that they haven't had to deal with in the past. So there's lots of considerations, but I mean, I think this is really an opportunity for leadership because you don't have the government to bail you out from a decision-making standpoint. You have to say, look at your workforce, look at the situation in your state, and make a good decision. I think the time for that decision is right now, and hopefully, what organizations have been doing over the past, depending on your state, 2 to 6 weeks, is looking at their options and making thoughtful considerations. So we've seen companies like Casebook, Duolingo, Dashlane, they've all publicly shared what they're going to be doing, what steps they're going to be taking as organizations go back to work. The steps, and some of them are really comprehensive, some of them are pretty simple, but those are good places to start because they've actually shared that information publicly, and it's a good sort of way to think about, okay, here's the steps that we're going to take. Here's how we're different than somebody like Duolingo, which is mainly a technology company. These are the things that we see different coming down the line. So those are some of the things that I've sort of seen as companies are starting to contemplate reopening.
Right, and again, it depends if you're in a city or you're rural. I mean, if you're going in and you have a space and you can take those precautions, but as simply as how do you get up to the 52nd floor? When before you'd have 15 people crammed into an elevator and you go, oh, can you squeeze one more in? And now it's like, oh no, you get 3 at a time going up. And you know how long it took to go up and down some of those elevators in the past. Traffic, even getting people, the subways, the buses, transportation, what's that going to look like?
Right.
So it's not only at work that employers are going to have to consider. It's like, we expect you to be here. What are the dangers along the line, and what's that leadership? Lee, let me throw it over to you a little bit. What are your, what are some of the concerns, some of the ideas? And I know you and I chatted a bit, and I know you've got a whole mountain full
I do. And the conversations that I'm having with HR leaders and practitioners is very simple. This is your moment of truth. Many companies out there are professing to be leaders in humanity and kindness and having these, altruistic images of their brand and their organization. I want to see that come to reality right now. What does that look like? Before you even think about bringing these people in, I tell them point blank, what do you want your brand to look and feel like and exist after this? What do you want to be known for? If we look at that first, and so what I'm forcing them to do is check their motives. So if your motive is purely economical, purely revenue driven, purely selfish, purely about your organization, and remember, an organization is comprised of people. You have no organization if the people are sick or if the people are dead. And I'm that blunt. So how do you want your organization to be perceived post-pandemic? And I say it just like that. What's your PP? What is your post-pandemic brand going to exude? Because I always think about recruiting. For me, it's always about the people solution. No company exists without human beings, right? Some need technology, right? There's that technology piece, but still the human being has a factor in that. So where does that play? So first I ask them to check their motives. Then I ask them, what do you want your brand to look like? And then we can start thinking about the human beings and how we want them to interact. The other thing that I am asking them to do for my neighbor's company, she is a financial institution. And for the past 25 years that she's been there, she said she's been told you cannot work from home. Under no uncertain circumstances, you cannot work from home. Guess what the pandemic did?
Everybody's working from home.
She's working from home. They got over the firewall issue. What a miracle. They got over the remote communication issue. The heavens opened up, right? All of a sudden, all these things become possibilities. Are we going to be able to stuff that genie back in the bottle and tell this woman she can't work from home now? Are we going to tell that person who is disabled, who can only leave their house maybe once or twice a week for whatever reason or can't come in at all? Are we now going to actually continue to rule them out as candidates, qualified candidates who simply are going to be in a different location? How do we work with that? And so on those three levels, I'm asking these companies, think long and hard about how you're going to go forward, and then talk to the big brains about the data and the analytics and all of that. But find out who the human is first. What is that trait of your company?
Well, and as you were talking there, I mean, and again, we were just talking a minute ago or so about the transportation. How do you get people to work? But how many people, I mean, my commute was down a few flights of steps for the last few years. It even worked, in a second tier. I mean, we're not in Manhattan, so, but if it took me 45 minutes to do a 20-minute ride, that was a traffic jam. But how many people are going to say, I don't know why I have to go into work 5 days a week. I want to keep my job, but I want to be able to work 3 days a week from home. And we'll figure that out. I don't want to lose 2 to 3 to 4 hours a week in transportation. I can tell you that, and again, I didn't commute to work, but over the last, I just got my statement for the last month, I saved about $120 worth of gas. And again, some of that was going out to eat, going to the movies, going to the gym every day, which is a couple miles away. But I'd meet people for lunch, and I would go out and I'd go to meetings and things. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, that's $100. I'm probably going to go back and I'd like to do some of the entertainment things. But I don't have, if I was commuting, I'm not sure I'd want to do that again. And even if I do, if I'm forced to do it, I may do it for a short time, but immediately be looking for another opportunity.
So Ira, take that and look at people who live in LA and look at the people who live outside New York City and look at the people who live around Washington, D.C. I average 20,000 miles a year in my car. That car's been sitting. And so I also believe that if we look at the motives around our where we are living as human beings, the skies are clearer, the roads are, more open, the water is clearer. I mean, there are aerial images of the globe right now that we haven't seen.
There's fish in the canals in Venice, and
Yes.
2 months ago they were talking about how they didn't want people to go in it because it was lethal.
That's right. So as I'm having these conversations about how to plan for going back, the first question is, what do you want that universe to look like now? What role is your organization playing in that? We've got to get to that human emotional level and not work in backwards from fear, right? Fear of litigation, fear of losing whatever control a hiring manager thinks that they should have over another human being. The pandemic has wiped the slate clean. We can start from scratch. And the people who are going to win at this pandemic are going to look at it as saying, let's pretend we're a startup. What should we be doing today in the 21st century with all the advanced technology that we have, with all the big brained people that we have walking around? What should we be doing today? Those people who have a startup mentality will just rock after the pandemic. They're going to win the best candidates. And their companies will soar. I am convinced of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things too that is worth considering too, and it's something that I've heard. Just there's some anecdata that I like to use just from talking with people that have said there's a couple different camps here. One of which is what you guys have described, which is people who have never worked from home or never been allowed to work from home. They're like, I'm not going to go to the office 5 days a week at the very least. And if I'm forced to do that at some point in the future, I may comply in the short term, but I'm going to be looking for opportunities where I'm going to be able to go work remotely in the future. That's going to be a bigger consideration. The other camp that I've heard has been people that are like, I never want to work from home again. This is terrible. And what I've tried to tell people, because I've worked from home for a decade, is that this is not normal. This is not normal for people that are work from home veterans right now. I used to shuffle everybody out of my house at 7:30 in the morning and have the house to myself until 3:30. That was great. Now nobody ever leaves, and we're all stuck here in the same house. It's changed my working hours significantly, even though I should be used to this, but it's a completely different thing. I just wonder. I don't know exactly how this shuffles out a little bit, but I do wonder how many people are going to say, like, I tried working from home during the pandemic and it sucked, and I never want to do that again. I can't wait to get back to my office. When that's not what it usually looks like, right? So I think there's a couple different camps there that I think organizations are going to have to account for. People that want to be in an office but want to be safe, and right. maybe they don't want to do it every single day too. So like, there's been a lot of stories out there about the real estate and office design aspect of this as well, and how much that's changing. As organizations have the ability to rejigger their internal workplaces or look at their real estate future and say, maybe we don't need to buy that new build, or maybe we need to think about our office space a lot differently now.
And I would say that there's a great case study. I don't know that it's actually been published, but I helped work on this launch. TSA moved their headquarters. And so the goal is to reduce that space by 30%. And so they created this hoteling opportunity. And so they intentionally reduced the size of their real estate to allow for remote work. So they are really working on becoming green. And again, what's their motive? Green. They probably also want to save the taxpayers a few dollars, right? So these were people who were working on this, 10 years ago? 5, 10, because it took that long to get anything through the government, right? But these guys are launching it. They're making it. If the TSA can do that,
you can. Yeah, lots of organizations can.
What excuses are we going to give that are going to that can't? Why can't we create an organization that says you have 3 ways of working with us, or 4 different ways of working with us, if not more? Why can't we think that way? Why can't we pretend that we don't have that tall building right now that we're renting or that we own. Parse it out. Do something different.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Lee. And I think one of the things too is for organizations that do require people coming into work. So you think about this meatpacking plant in Southeast Washington that's been in the news because they're an essential. They were an essential employer. They didn't have to follow any rules, and they just packed people in there like they normally did. Shoulder to shoulder working. Very familiar with that. I used to live 40 minutes away from that meatpacking plant. Know people that have worked there in the past. They followed their legal obligations, you could say, maybe not from a complete OSHA standpoint, but, at least the letter of what they were given from a guidance perspective. But, I certainly look at the way that organizations are operating right now. I'd certainly look at Tyson a lot differently now than I did in the past because of the way that they treated their employees. And that's a green outcome too, as well. Rethinking our choices as consumers as well. In addition to, just would you recommend somebody work there? Hell no. That would be a terrible situation to go into, knowing that they're just going to do the bare minimum in order to keep their employees safe. I imagine they're going to have a real tough time once this thing passes, if that plant manages to survive. So we have to rethink the employee experience, not just from a corporate standpoint, but from are we going to pack people shoulder to shoulder again? Once this thing passes, I don't think that's a good environment, period. But it certainly doesn't make sense in a post-pandemic world.
So Lance, going back to something that you said before about the people that are saying, hey, I hope I'm never going to work from home again. And again, it's a little different environment. Two thoughts went through my mind are those the same people that were also vulnerable before this of losing their job because they're not comfortable with doing the virtual thing and the technology and they're on their own. They got to figure this out. And hey, I can go back to work and somebody does that for me. So I think that's part of it. But the other one is that still, to me, that still senses that they're thinking we're going back to normal. I'm going to go back to a workplace that it looks and feels and operates like it did 7 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it's not. So there's two questions here. So they're going to go back and all of a sudden I don't get to give my coworkers a hug. I've got plexiglass around my desk. I can't go to the lunchroom or we don't even have coffee there because shared goods because people were dipping into the same thing. All these things change and all of a sudden it's really uncomfortable, which brings up the second part of that is where companies said before is you'd be too unproductive working from home. Therefore, we're not going to allow anybody to do it. Is it going to be more unproductive to bring some of these people back into the workforce, into the workplace?
It's good. That's a good question. I'm very curious what Lee has to say, but I'll give you my answer too. From my perspective, I think there's a couple things. One is I think there's going to be some really weird intermediate steps as we transition. That's going to be it's going to be weird. And I think I've been a little bit of a doubter as far as the long term impact. So thinking ahead 5 years, how much different does work look than it did 4 months ago? I don't have a crystal ball, unfortunately, but I do doubt just how much it goes. But at the same time, I also go back to the fact that almost 20 years ago, somebody tried to light their shoe as a bomb onto an airplane, and we still have to take off our shoes, even though that's never even been close to happening again. So I mean, some of these changes will be lasting, and I think. It's going to be, to me, it's going to be surprising which ones are going to be lasting because as a hugger, it's going to be tough for a while. I mean, I love hugging people. And so it's going to be tough just to unlearn that, especially because I've been so isolated.
Even shaking a hand.
Even shaking hands, yeah, exactly. I'm not a big handshaker. I'm a big hugger though, so that's going to be out for a long time. But I hope I get back to a place where we can hug. And then I think one of the challenges there too is just I think thinking about, and maybe this goes back to what Lee was saying too, about like, are we thinking about productivity? Or are we thinking about like, how do we work together going forward? I think we've had such great productivity gains over the past 2 decades, especially here in the US, when you look at sort of productivity as a measure of labor. That I think we could just like use this time to figure out, okay, how do we work together? Whether that's in an office, whether that's all remote, whether that's some hybrid that's enabled by technology, we need to be thinking through that, not just from a productivity lens, but from a human lens as well, because I think that's what's going to take to survive beyond just the next few months.
Yeah, I think that, very simple. In relationships, sick people attract sick people, well people attract well people. When you look at a company who wants well people, they're going to create an environment to help them remain well. That is not brain surgery, right? So to your point about, are we going to forget what happened with this pandemic and go back to old ways? Well, let me tell you something. We are. And let me tell you how I know that. I don't even need a crystal ball, because look at where we are today. We have thousands of years of history lessons that we could have learned from. The protocol was already available for us on how to handle this, right? Maybe IBM didn't know who their essential employees were, but if we would have followed protocol, we might not have had to need that to do that, right? So we have to look at that. So my fear is that we get the vaccine for COVID. There's another virus just aching to come out.
How about a digital virus?
Yeah, it could be anything. It could be any type of issue that is going to shut this country down, or world, right? And we quickly forget, when things start to feel good, we forget the pain that we were in. Right? And so we go back to old ways very, very quickly. Or we try the new way for, say, 3 to 5 years and then go back to the old way because somebody at some point remembers the good old days or the way things used to work, or has that bias or perception, right? That they think that you're going to be more productive in this environment. So it's unfortunate, Lance, but pain is the driver. Pain will always be the driver.
3 years. You're talking about 3 weeks. I mean, people are protesting to reopen right now. They're already tired of this new normal.
Let's talk about that. So here's what I'm getting. I got a call. I want to talk about that work from home, Ira, because that's a really good point. That people who don't like working from home think that life is going to be better once they go back to work. So I just talked to a friend last night who he goes, I'm about to lose my marriage here. Because
some of that going on, right?
Yeah. Right. So his office, he's been working from home for decades. And all of a sudden, the spouse is in the house and the spouse has no boundaries. No boundaries. It's my house. I'll do as I'll please. And so my concern is actually not for the person who is continually working at home to get his space back again, but for the person who's going back to the organization, back into the office. Their life is going to change. And their fear is, this person's fear is that they're not going to be able to go back as often as they want to.
Yeah.
Right. So even if they have this on-off kind of cycle, they're not going to be happy with that. They want it all on site or on one spouse and off site for the other. So there's so many human values to work through here. And if companies don't take it, companies need to look at every employee as an end user. Use it as a research study. UX, if we follow UX protocol, you are going to research all of your employees and find out where they feel more productive, ask them to back it up with some research or science, and then you can start rebuilding your workforce. That's what we do, right? We need to be rethinking our workforce every day.
So for the next 2 or 3 hours that we're going to talk about this, so there were 2 thoughts that were going through my head right there, and one of them, I go with the first one, of where is this the tipping point for the millennial? And the millennials, by the way, are 42 years old now, so we're still talking about it like these 22-year-old kids, but and I keep hearing in some of these other discussions and panels and things, is that is this the time where the the 20 and the 30-year-olds finally get their voice. They now start talking about well-being. They start talking about treating us as human beings. They start talking about climate. They start talking about the environment. Is this the tipping point for them?
We've been talking about that stuff, Ira.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm an old millennial.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're the only one that can probably legitimately.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair,
I'm not saying talking about it, but is this the tipping point?
Yeah, I mean, are we going to be listened to? I think that's going to be the question. I think for some people this has been a really eye-opening experience, and I don't think we need history to just sort of figure that part out. Is that this sort of change opens you to a different idea about the world, even if it's uncomfortable. Even to your point, Lee, people want to think about what normal, going back to the way things were. It certainly opens up possibilities that I think but I think also humans are very naturally resistant to change. And so like anyone along those lines, I feel like what this has helped is, I always say change comes with time. But so, I mean, I think you could look at this as an accelerator. I think it'll help us, maybe have some environmental conversations, because that's always been a big thing. Lee, to your point, about not commuting. I mean, I've spent 90 minutes to 2 hours in a car, going from one place to the other. I've done public transit, which is a little bit less impactful on the environment, but it's still time consuming and not great for my mental well-being or my physical well-being as well. So that's been a big part about why I've made the choice to pursue opportunities that only let me work from home. I think you'll see a lot more people kind of pursuing that and accelerating that pursuit because they finally experience something closer to that.
So I'm going to throw a curveball at both of you.
Yeah.
Imagine this. Imagine that the world, you can all go back to work, not a problem. We know that we have parents who do not vaccinate their children. We just experienced that with, what was it? Measles? Was it measles last year?
Yes.
Right. Yep.
So what about the adults who are anti-vaxxers and they would not get the coronavirus vaccine? It's okay to not get the flu shot now because that's not as, big of a deal as much as it used to be. But what if this vaccine comes out and people opt out? Now what? Are we going to give them the opportunity to work from home and say, if you don't vaccinate, you have to work from home? Do we wear signs on ourselves and say, I'm a vaxxer?
Hey, you got a QR code that you have to use to walk out on the street, right?
But you know what I'm saying? These are the things that we need to think about today, not when it's happening.
That's right.
But today, now.
Especially, I think that's a great point, Lee, for organizations that already have vaccination requirements because, they're in healthcare or they're working with schools or those sorts of things. You don't have a choice. It's like, you're either you're getting a TB test, you're getting vaccinated, you're getting the flu shot, or otherwise you're not working here. I think for companies, I think it's going to be interesting. Because I think there has to be a legal aspect of this as well. There's probably going to be a legal question there. It's like, can we, because of the safety of this thing, and I know we'll get more information on COVID as we continue to do more testing and that sort of thing, but because of the safety aspect, can we make people do this? Can we kind of put a line in the sand and say, unless your doctor excuses you because you're not able to do a vaccine, that's going to be the only exception to this. I'm very curious about that because I'd want to know that I'm going into a place where people are vaccinated and where people are safe.
And the argument for that, Lance, would be, we don't do that for flu shots. People aren't mandated to get it. We don't know if they've got it. And if they have a cold, they're still coming into the office, right? That's right. So, and why are they coming into the office when this is a question I just posed to an HR leader. I says, well, why are your people coming into the office with a cold? What's your policy around that?
That's right. Yeah.
And I mean, we've been talking about employees, but will you feel safe if you go to a restaurant and and either the patrons or anywhere. It could be a law office, it could be a medical office.
Exactly.
That the personnel isn't. So one is the personnel protected, but is how do they treat their customers or the patients or their consumers? And would you expose yourself because, hey, it's my favorite restaurant, it's a favorite place I like to buy things or go to, or entertainment or movies, and you realize that there's people there that aren't abiding by not only physical distancing, but some personal protection. And you always see that. You always see that happen. There's also, there's a whole other thing. I'm sitting there and I said to my wife last night, and I looked and I go, so how do you get a haircut with a face mask? So it's like,
I don't have to worry about that.
In order to come in, in order to go into, to get your haircut or to eat.
Well,
how do you go to a restaurant and say, well, everybody's protected, and go, well, you're 6 feet apart. Okay. Are they going to throw the dishes? Are the waiters going to throw the dishes at you? What happens on flights? You can't even, it was like, you can sneak the peanuts under your mask, but how do you have your coffee? There is just a whole lot of things that are going to change. Hey, we've been going at this a while, and we probably could go for hours. One final question to you guys, and when we're talking about people, what about engagement? Where do you think employee engagement? I wish we had Mike Mike Clark from Gallup on it. But where do you think engagement's going to go? Because it was already pretty tenuous. It was one of those things of companies that were already swimming naked, under, and now the tide went out, and they got exposed for sure. Where do you think employee engagement is going to go over the next 12 months?
Well, I'll take that one first. I think you have to kind of start with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So safety is top of that list. So I feel like for organizations that don't have that accounted for, don't make their people feel safe about coming in or working, there's no hope for those organizations. They're going to plummet from an engagement perspective. And I think for more important, even if you don't think engagement's a super important measure, things like retention, things like, effort and productivity, all those things are going to go down in those types of environments where you have to worry about whether I'm going to get my family sick because I'm coming into work every single day. So if they don't figure that part out, there's going to be a lot of organizations that are going to really suffer. I think that's sort of the big thing. The second thing is, employee engagement was a challenge during the boom times. We didn't see it really start to tick up until the last couple of years of really great economic times for almost every organization, every industry. We just started to see that sort of go up. So I imagine it's going to go down across the board. But really, the across the board measures never have mattered to any HR professional. They care about what's going on in their organization. I think organizations that are remembering the humanity of their people, that are taking care of them, that are doing the right things, this could be an opportunity to refresh that engagement, to say, wow, this company is making difficult decisions to take care of me during this time, when they could easily be justified laying off people or treating us poorly because of tough economic times. So for individual organizations, it's going to be an opportunity to just sort of refresh that spirit. For a lot of organizations, though, they're going to suffer.
And so I want to make sure I understand what you mean by engagement. Are you talking about employee engagement with the company, or HR engagement with company employees, or both ways, or just companies and employees, period?
I was referring to employees' engagement with the company.
All right. So from that perspective, I would say, just as motives are the center for a company's existence in their brand and how they want to engage and how they want to work and create an experience for the employees and their customers, the employee side of that is motives plus priorities. right? So a company's priority, number one, it doesn't need to be written, revenue. Revenue is a company's number one priority. Without it, that's their blood. Without it, they go nowhere, right? So they're constantly building engagements around increasing revenue, increasing market share, improving their brand experience. What does an employee focus on? The employee focuses on the same thing, but for self. So if their priority and their motive is to stay healthy, and they realize if they are not healthy, they will not be able to earn a living, guess what happens? They're not going to engage, as Lance said, with an organization that puts them in harm's way. That is their first and I think for people who are rushing in the water, right, knowing that there is not just one great shark, but a school of great sharks that are out there, and they're hungry, and they are just as equal of a feeding machine, right, called this virus. These people have a priority that puts economics over everything else, that puts socialization over everything else, right? So it depends on the employee. And as many human beings as we have living in the United States and across the world, that is how many people you may see engaging or not engaging, but it's based on that priority. What is your priority? Is it economic? Is it health? Do you see the connection between health and economics? Does it matter to you? Now, I am going to tell you a story about my 90-year-old Sicilian mother. She still drives and she still lives on her own. She refuses to wear a face mask. She goes into Safeway and they stop her, right? They stop her and they usher her off to the pharmacy to get her a face mask. They don't have a face mask. She then goes over to the deli section because they have to wear face masks there as well, and they give her a face mask. And she goes about her day. What is her priority? I want what I want when I want it. Mm-hmm. I'm 90. What have I got to lose?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I've got a 96-year-old mother who will be 97 in September. She lives alone. She actually moved out of her independent living because she hated it and moved into an apartment, this massive apartment. We can live in there with our family. Why she needs that at 96? But she's sheltered in place. She doesn't go anybody. She doesn't let anybody in. She's disinfecting everything. I've got my father, my stepfather's 94. You know, he doesn't go too many places. But I mean, I'm sure when she goes out, she'll have a mask. But
and we will have employees like that.
Oh, we will have employees. Well, you already have. Look at all the people that are standing on the steps of capitals and protesting. So there's a whole lot of subjects we didn't get to. That was one of them. Is what HR's role. I mean, we talked about being more human. And my talk last year and that I've presented at a lot of places, but my presentation last year at SHRM Annual was keeping the H in HR, and everybody thought was, oh, thank goodness you're going to talk about why we should get rid of technology, and we're going to talk about being human. And I was like, no, HR is not. HR took the H out of HR a long time ago. It is the HR black hole. You were administrators, you were compliance people, you were compliance cops. And every once in a while, you threw a pizza party. No, that's not the way it is. So hopefully there's going to be a rebound. Hopefully there's going to be a focus on that. And then we talk about, is this HR's time? I'd love to have you back and talk about is this HR's time to really not just, they got the seat at the table, but to get a voice at the table, to be heard, to help lead the emergence out of it. Or are they just going to be following the dictates again and say, hey, here's what we decided and you guys go figure it out yourself. And the other thing is go ahead, Lance.
I was going to say a lot of organizations have figured out whether they have good HR leaders right now. I mean, I think the tide has gone out on a lot of this. So, I mean, they're figuring out whether they have an administrator, whether they have a leader at that level. And for organizations to have a leader, they're having a really different experience than the ones that don't. So I do think, I mean, like, this is a great time to be a great leader in HR. It's a really bad time to not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other thing that we never talked about, and I know this is our one of our loves all across the board, we didn't talk about talent acquisition. We didn't talk about hiring people. And I've been saying, if you've heard any of seen any of the live streams, I came up with this about 2 weeks ago on the fly, and it's stuck. It resonated. And I said, but talent acquisition moving forward will be like shoveling out of a blizzard with a teaspoon.
Yeah.
I mean, 6 weeks ago, we had 3 to 4 million people.
Right.
We couldn't find people, but there were 3 to 4 million people that were unemployed. That was it. Now you have 30 million people, literally 10 times the amount of people are going to hit your front doorsteps, are going to be in your inbox, are going to be flooding your ATS, and they weren't working before. I mean,
so I read that point. I think that it's important, and this is what I'm professing, is that, yes, we need to look at that talent acquisition component, but I think that we also need to go back and say, look at the talent management. Look at your entire people solution and how flexible can you be in incorporating the various ways that you can work with a human being, right? Yeah. On-site, off-site, near-site, long-term, short-term, contract, full-time, blah, blah, blah. There are just so many ways, because that is how people now want options. The greatest talent that are available want options, right? They are not going to be the first ones through that door. The ones that are going to be the first ones through that door, their priority is income, and I'll get it any way that I can.
Right.
Yeah, so we need to think much bigger than that, much further down the road than that. Again, my concern is that we are going to forget everything that we were just put through, and so easily. So, so we'll see.
Well, I mean, Lee, and you probably experienced this too. Organizations know how to lay off people in mass. I mean, there's a playbook for that. It's been around for years and years. They've done it over and over again through recessions. Nobody's ever had to mass rehire people. I think we're gonna get to that point where we're gonna have to figure out some new processes.
Right.
To your point, hopefully it's not on the fly though. Hopefully people have been thinking about how we're going to do this and how we're going to do this with.
Actually, that's kind of not completely accurate. When you look at companies like Amazon, they had to staff up really fast. I mean, I've gotten calls from clients over the decades, because I've been in staffing most of my life, right? In workforce solutions, where I will get a call that says, we need 100 people by X. And of course, that's in manufacturing and production, right? But now the same thing was happening with UX. I need to stand up a UX team of 30 people inside 3 months. Or a design team of 50 people and blah, 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 right? These are the kinds of business problems that we're solving. Multiply that times how many million, right? Yeah.
But now they don't even know if they have a workplace to go back to. So now it may be hiring remote people. So
that's the. I mean, I think that's the thing that people have to be rethinking right now. Is just what it's not just turning back on the ATS and putting all your jobs back in there.
Right.
It's going to be having conversations and thinking a lot differently about your talent acquisition.
And I know we're just about out of time, but I know we had before, we were talking about the rules and the laws and the standing and ADA, protection under the ADA, but that's for employees. For a candidate, you can't do a medical test. You can't take their temperature because it violates the ADA. So it means all interviews will be virtual.
Yeah. Can I get my
It'll be interesting. Yeah. I mean, we can have a discussion, but that's basically according to the way the laws are written and what the exceptions are right now, is that you could not test a candidate, because that would be testing before the job offer to have them come in for an interview. So a lot of can of worms. We can be here for hours. And I'm sure by tomorrow there'll be 15 other subjects we can talk about. Hey, I really appreciate you guys. And as I said, I failed again miserably. Didn't even come close to 30 minutes. We doubled that. Lee, how can people get in touch with you?
They can reach me on LinkedIn at Lee Andrese. I connect with everybody. And you can also email me at landrese, ANDRESE, Landrese at akathame, AKATHAME.com.
And I blew how you pronounce your company's name, so I apologize. Cool. Lance.
You just Google my name. That's probably the easiest way to find how to find me. But Lance at TLNT.com is email, and that's something I'm keeping up on.
Yeah, and I need to go up and I know it's probably buried in my email today, but I got to get that article, that new one that came out. Sounds like it's right up our alley. Hey, I really appreciate it. For everybody who's listening, very grateful. I know we had a number of people stuck with us the whole time, and really appreciate you being here. Remember to, if you're not part of Googleization Nation, throw that up for a second. Go up to Googleizationnation.com. You'll get updates about this either by email or text. And next Monday, taking a break tomorrow, one too many interviews. Monday with Dorothy Dalton, we'll be continuing this conversation about the disruption of leadership, the future of leadership. And then Tuesday, got Elena Valentine at Humans at Work. And that we definitely were touching about. And you guys, if you haven't seen that, I'll send you the link.
It's really good.
But
I watched it.
Very, very powerful. So, hey, appreciate it. Stay safe, stay healthy.
You too.
And thanks for being part of this.
Thank you.